Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 366. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to get into on today's show, but first want to remind everyone that we are hosting a fundraiser right now at the Libertarian Institute, and here's a message from the director, Scott Horton.
Hey, you all, it's fundraising time again at the Libertarian Institute. We try not to do this to you too often, but business is business after all. I got a great group of guys and a gal at the Institute, and I got to pay them. So just go to libertarianinstitute.org/donate to pick your price and help out. We've got some great kickbacks too, books and shirts. Great ones. That's libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And thank you all very much.
All right, so if you could head on over to libertarianinstitute.org/donate and, make a donation, would really help us out and help me to continue all the writing, the shows, and all the work that I do, as a libertarian and as an anti-war activist. And with that, let's get into today's show. First article, Biden signs $858 billion 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, and this is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. We've been talking about this bill quite a bit over the past few weeks, but want to just drill in on this one more time as it has now been passed. President Biden on Friday signed a massive $858 billion 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, which is $45 billion more than he requested. Also on Friday, the House passed the $1.7 trillion omnibus bill that includes funding for the NDAA, sending the legislation to President Biden's desk. The mammoth spending bill passed through the House on a 225 to 201 vote, with only 9 Republicans voting in favor. To avert a government shutdown, Congress has also passed a temporary one-week stopgap funding bill, which President Biden signed on Friday. The temporary bill gives him until December 30th to sign the omnibus into law, which he is expected to do in the coming days. The omnibus bill includes about $45 billion in new aid for Ukraine, bringing the total U.S. spending on the war to about $112 billion. And I've seen, the numbers range. I think about $108 billion is the low end, and then all the way up to the 120s and 130s billion dollars. Some people are estimating, but I think Dave in the one teens is probably right, between 112 and 118. More spending for Ukraine is packed into the National Defense Authorization Act, including $800 million in the Security Assistance Initiative, Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which allows the U.S. governments to purchase weapons for Kiev. And the USAI is a fund, and what they do with this fund is they could purchase weapons from arms maker rather than just transferring them out of U.S. stockpiles. And so one of the reasons I'm concerned about this is it seems like just kind of a slush fund for the military industrial complex, and the Pyongyang could buy whatever weapons they want with this to start $800 million, but I'm sure it's they're going to keep adding to that pot. And they're already talking about developing new weapon systems for the war in Ukraine, so it'll likely be a huge boon to these weapons makers. Next article I have here, and I want to spend a minute talking about the situation in Korea, especially as we are at the end of 2022. So I think it's probably a good time to, just mention and look at some of the things that have happened on the Korean Peninsula this year, and just how terrible Joe Biden's policy have been. But first, I'll start with this article from myself and Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute. North Korean drones penetrate South Korean airspace. 5 North Korean drones crossed into South Korea, including one that flew near Seoul. South Korea responded by scrambling jets as well as attack helicopters and attempted to shoot down the drones. Crossing into Seoul's airspace on Monday, the UVAs measured about 2 meters across, according to South Korea defense official Lee Song-gol. He added that Seoul failed in its attempts to shoot down the drones, one craft returning to North Korean territory, while the fate of the other 4 remains unclear. And I think that's because of tracking. I did see a lot of claims that one of these drones did get shot down. And if you look at a picture, the picture story I used for this article is one of the only free use North Korean drone pictures I could find. But that is from a drone that did crash, but that was from 2017. It's not current. And so there's no evidence to me that any of these drones did crash. Seoul says it's unsure if the drones were armed or not. The airspace incursion called South Korea to temporarily close two of its largest airports, as well as scramble several jets and helicopters, including one light attack aircraft that crashed. I did see that South Korea said both of the pilots escaped unharmed. So good news there that nobody got hurt. And then, worth noting that in the past, South Korea launched a missile barrage in response to North Korea testing missiles. They fired them into the sea like North Korea does. And one of those missiles actually malfunctioned and hit somewhere in South Korea, I believe a military base. And so this is kind of the second time where a attempt to show force in response to North Korea has actually left South Korea with some egg on its face, some real mistakes there. So South Korea additionally responded with a surveillance flight over North Korea and said it aimed at photographing military installations. Pyongyang has not commented on the drones. The last time North Korea sent unmanned aircraft over the border was in 2017, at a time of soaring tensions between Washington and Pyongyang, exemplified by a high-profile nuclear threat directly from President Donald Trump. However, in Trump's second year as president, he engaged North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un in several rounds of talks, allowing Washington, Seoul, and Pyongyang to significantly roll back military activity on the Korean Peninsula. Since Joe Biden became president, the White House has failed to propose talks with Kim on acceptable grounds, instead demanding the DPRK simply abandon its nuclear arsenal. The stall in diplomacy has led to a return of militarism, with North Korea carrying out a record number of missile tests in 2022, while claiming to have made a very important technological gains. Meanwhile, Washington and Seoul have conducted several rounds of joint war games in recent months. In August, the two allies conducted live-fire drills for the first time in 4 years, while the U.S. and South Korea completed their largest ever aerial exercises on the Korean Peninsula in October. The Biden White House has additionally threatened to use nuclear weapons against North Korea, and in June, the president signed a trilateral pact with Seoul and Tokyo, set to further strengthen military ties between the three countries. Japan, for its part, is planning a massive military buildup that will soon see Tokyo become the world's third highest spender on weapons, largely setting its sights on alleged threats posed by North Korea and China. All right, so a little bit more to unpack from this article. I believe this is the first time that North Korea ever sent multiple drones into South Korea, which is, notable, as if it's only one drone, I think you can assert, and it may even be the case that something malfunctioned and that drone accidentally crossed into South Korean airspace. When you have five, it's pretty clearly coordinated. Another piece of this is that South Korea wasn't able to shoot out any of the drones, which maybe they were very reserved in using any anti-drone technology out of fears of downing the drone and having that hit and kill somebody, or the anti-aircraft weapons themselves ended up causing more damage than the drones, because obviously they didn't do anything. Maybe we're on a surveillance mission. I assume that North Korea at least had some advanced cameras and other technology attached to those things, that they did send them over into South Korean airspace. They didn't just do it as a blanket show of force with no, intelligence possibly looking to gain from it, although they might have. And then, of course, South Korea did photograph North Korean military installations and crossed over, in basically a reciprocal move after. Now, I guess I want to take a few steps back and look at what has happened, particularly over the past 5 years, where you have Trump take office and he instantly escalates the situation with North Korea in a really bad way. And it takes a really significant political change in South Korea to allow for the right political opportunity to occur for Trump to correct this. So two prime ministers or presidents ago in South Korea. There was a woman, I believe her name was Park, and she was the leader of the country. She was indicted and I believe actually went to jail for corruption. She was conservative, and so, a conservative leader having such a massive legal issue and losing the office for that reason paved the way for a very liberal candidate like President Moon to come in and become president of South Korea, and he held that position. I think it's a 4 or 5 year term until this March. And so during that period where Moon was the president of South Korea, I think facilitated a lot of the diplomacy between the North and the South, but Trump was between North Korea and Washington. But I think very importantly, Trump was acceptable to that. And despite all the fire and fury and everything like that, one of the things that we had talked about on, the old show Foreign Policy Focus was Trump coming into office wasn't necessarily a good thing for, foreign policy and anti-war activists. However, Trump didn't seem bound by Washington consensus and conventions. And so with that, Trump at least made statements to North Korea that opened the door for diplomacy, because he didn't just take the line that North Korea has to give up all of its weapons of mass destruction. So this leads to a real opening of diplomacy, a real de-escalation of military tensions on the Korean Peninsula that last for 2 solid years, from 2017 until the late 2017 until the Hanoi summit. We have good things going on. And then really, even as they meet through the DMZ, there's not a lot of weapons tests going on in North Korea in 2019. I think in part the pandemic helped give the U.S. and Seoul the cover to continue to scale back the military games in 2020 and 2021. But then in 2022, we've lit them back on fire. And so once Trump left office and Biden came in, Biden said he was going to split the difference between the Trump and Obama policies on North Korea, where Trump, his initial policy was of threats. But I think what Biden was talking about was the latter policy of engagement versus what Obama did, which was they called strategic patience, which was basically to say, when North Korea gives up its nuclear weapons, we'll then try to engage in talks. But until that point, we just have no interest in it. And so it's not going to be an issue. And we're going to continue with the sanctions and the economic warfare and all of that. So the Biden administration did not split the difference, though. They just adopted the Obama policy, and that, led to the end of any negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea. And there's an active economic war waged by pretty much the entire world, but led by Washington and Western partners against North Korea, that really, really makes it difficult for North Korea to interact with anyone. And so it seems for the most of the first year of Biden's presidency, the North Koreans basically were hoping that the White House would propose talks on acceptable grounds, and that never happened. And so they kicked off 2022 by carrying out larger missile tests. Nothing that really threatened anyone, just carrying out missile tests. I'm not sure they claimed any real gains. They tested a new intercontinental ballistic missile, I believe, in March, and I don't think the test went particularly well. But anyways, I think the major escalation in 2022 was on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Madrid. And I think it was either late May or early June. The U.S., along with Japan and South Korea, signed a trilateral pact to increase military ties. Now, as I mentioned in the article, and this is becoming more and more relevant, Japan is really looking to beef up its military and become more of a military threat. And of course, if we just go back to World War II, this isn't that long ago, and look at the effects of Japanese colonialism in South Korea and North Korea, and on the Korean Peninsula, right? The North Koreans were impacted by this too. It was absolutely horrendous. And so it would be no surprise if North Korea, and as I did, reacted very sharply to that. And these three countries have started to carry out military gains. The U.S. has also, focused on increasing other Indo-Pacific pacts and alliances under Biden, like the Quadrilateral Alliance or AUKUS, right? Bringing it. I think this is largely, in the eyes of Washington, all focused on Beijing. And I think that's probably the way, the Pentagon, everybody views it. However, North Korea is going to view that as a threat too, and rightfully so from their perspective. Even if the U.S. military in the region is focused on Beijing, it doesn't mean it can't pivot to Pyongyang and, and the Kim regime very quickly. And so, all this is going on, these building of alliances, but particularly that one between Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington, I think was highly provocative. And then when we get to August, we had the U.S. resuming live fire war games for the first time in 4 years, major military exercises in successive months. We had Kamala Harris at the DMZ threatening to use nuclear weapons against North Korea. And so the Biden White House really just does flat out not understand how to deal with Kim Jong-un. This is a man who is sitting on a pile of nuclear weapons. He has intercontinental ballistic missiles. There's hundreds of thousands of American forces within range of North Korea's, pretty diverse. They have multiple ways to launch their missiles, from rail, from undersea silos. I think they've tested and they've claimed it has submarine launched ballistic missiles. And so with all of this, there's a lot of Americans that are in harm's way here. And rather than to approach this in a way that recognizes North Korea's strengths, what they have been able to do. And look, I'm not trying to praise the Kim regime, right? Like, they've obviously done a lot of really bad things, mostly to their own people. Nuclear proliferation is something that I'm against. But, like from a cold calculating perspective, the Kim family has been able to, maintain rule over the top half of the Korean peninsula for decades and decades and decades now. And they've advanced their military. And so, they've been able to make these successes, and that's something that the U.S. realistically has to deal with. And rather than just saying we need everything before we even talk, North Korea is never going to get to that. Now, I think another problem is the Biden administration, and this isn't all the Biden administration's fault. It's also part of how it went on the tail end of the Trump administration. With like John Bolton showing up at Hanoi and just the U.S. not following through on any of, what was talked about in, where was that first summit at? Singapore. It really didn't follow through on any of that and make the progress that North Korea was hoping for. We're now in a situation where North Korea just may not think that there's a deal to be made with the Biden administration. I'm sure it doesn't also help that the Iran nuclear deal backing out of that and everything. So anyways, I mean, I just wanted to talk about this so much today because I do think when we look on the horizon in 2023, war with North Korea still has to be considered very unlikely. However, I would have said the same thing about war in Ukraine this time last year. And, again, this is a situation where the Biden administration could likely go sit down and make some progress, but they absolutely refuse to and just get into this cycle of escalation. All right, Ned's story, and I have a few stories on Russia here. Report, the CIA is directing sabotage attacks inside Russia. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The CIA has been using European NATO countries' intelligence services to conduct sabotage attacks inside Russia since the February invasion of Ukraine, investigative journalist Jack Murphy reported on Saturday, citing unnamed U.S. intelligence officials and military officials. So a couple things here. I do not think that this is an official leak. My sense is, and this is one of the reasons that because it's unnamed sources and that it's not an official leak, that the reason that these people may go unnamed is because they really could get in trouble for saying something here. Although I don't want to just endorse that and say, don't worry about it. No reason to raise any alarms there or anything. Rightfully so, unnamed officials should always raise alarms, but we'll get into this and why I think it might be accurate. The report said that no U.S. personnel are on the ground in Russia, but that the operations are being directed by the CIA. The U.S. is using an allies intelligence service to add an extra layer of plausible deniability, and a former U.S. Special Operations official told Murphy that the lawyer was a major factor in President Biden signing off on the attacks. The layer, excuse me, not lawyer, the layer. So it doesn't name this ally, and knowing that ally would probably help us understand what's exactly going on here. Of course, there's a list of 27 countries that we could speculate from here, because all we know is that it's a NATO country. My guess is that it's Poland or one of the Baltic states. My second guess, well, I guess this would technically be fifth, but next would be the UK. And then, of course, there's a lot of other states, if they're just adding a layer. And, of course, here we have to look at, and this isn't something that I know a lot about, are which of the NATO security intelligence agencies, right, the CIA of equivalents, does the CIA have the strongest link with? Is it the MI5? Is it Latvia? Is it Lithuania? Is Poland? I'm not exactly sure. So, lots of questions still here. Murphy said he didn't name the NATO countries whose intelligence services were being used in the report because doing so might endanger their operational security cells that are still in operation inside Russia. The report appeared on Mondays on Murphy's personal website, and in a note at the end of the piece, he explained why it wasn't published by a media outlet. While working with editors at mainstream publications, I was asked to do things that were illegal and unethical in one instance, and in another instance, I felt that a senior CIA official was able to edit my article by making off-the-record statements before he leaked the story to the New York Times to undermine this piece. And so this is the part that makes me think that it's not an official leak, is that he was reaching out to more mainstream sources, and they tried to basically water down his scoop here, right? Water down his story. And that's why it ends up at his own site. But I guess it would suggest to me, if these outlets felt like they had to go to the deep state to get somebody to comment on their story, then the story wouldn't be coming from the deep state in the first place. I'm not sure what the illegal piece is. That's really interesting. According to the report, the covert campaign inside Russia has been years in the making. Two former military officials said that the NATO countries' spy services have been a hidden cache of explosives and equipment in Russia more than a decade ago, and some gear has been used recently. A former U.S. Special Operations official and U.S. persons briefed on the campaign said that the CIA didn't get involved with the NATO countries' operations inside Russia until 2014, the first time sleeper cells entered Russia that were directed by both the CIA and the NATO Ally Spy Service was in 2016, and more entered the country in the following years. And so I think this is really significant for a couple of reasons. The first is that and Caitlin Johnstone makes a really good point about this today too in her article. For the case that this war, that the invasion of Ukraine wasn't provoked by NATO, you would have to ignore things like this going on, right? Like, we have Angela Merkel, who was then the premier of Germany in 2015 when the Minsk agreement was signed, saying that the reason they signed that was to give Ukraine more time to prepare for war, not to actually resolve the crisis in eastern Ukraine. And of course, for the past 10 years, we've been preparing to carry out attacks inside of Russia, then that would certainly suggest that Russia had a right to be afraid of NATO. The NATO ally provided the undercover operations with stories to explain their presence in Russia and documents to back them up. The report said that around the time Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, the NATO ally spy service activated sleeper cells inside Russia using covert communications, and they were ready for orders and what targets to strike. It's not clear how many attacks the sleeper cells have been responsible for, but there has been a series of mysterious explosions at Russian military facilities, power plants, and railways since the invasion. The report suggests that the saboteurs could have been behind the April fire at a research institute of Russia's aerospace defense forces, which killed over 20 people. The sabotage operations that the CIA is overseeing require a presidential finding. President Obama signed a finding before he left office that allowed covert operations against Russia over allegations that Moscow interfered in the 2016 election, a claim that has never been proven. According to the Washington Post, Obama's findings allow planning cyber weapons systems in Russia infrastructure, the digital equivalent of bombs that could be detonated if the United States found itself in an escalating exchange with Moscow. Murphy cited a former CIA official who said the finding also allowed sabotage operations against Russia, although another former official he spoke with said the current operations would have required an amendment or entirely new finding. A CIA spokesperson denied the allegations made in the report, but Murphy pointed out the spy agency can legally deny the existence of its covert operations. The CIA directing sabotage inside Russia risks major escalation between NATO and Russia and could lead to a nuclear escalation. Ukraine has recently stepped up its own attacks inside Russian territory. According to the Times, the Pentagon tactically endorsed recent drone strikes that hit air bases deep inside Russian territory, adding to the risk of escalation. There's another attack at the Russian airbase that houses this strategic bombers. Another 3 Russian soldiers were killed. I think Russia claims they downed the drone as it was coming in, and that's how the 3 died. I'm not sure. That's just what the Russians say. But I do assume that the drone attack did happen regardless of how successful it was or not. In his note at the end of the report, Murphy said that he published a story to inform the public. Indeed, the Russian government knows perfectly well who is sponsoring these sabotage strikes. Moreover, the intelligence community wants them to know. The only party left in the dark is the public at large, left unaware of the shadow war taking place behind the scenes. Murphy said the article went through vigorous fact-checking process and was deemed newsworthy by as the strategic bombings of Lasar Kabadia or the CIA secret drone campaign in Pakistan. So that, he's claiming it's pretty significant. One of the reasons that I think this article deserves our attention is because Jack Murphy did some pretty good reporting on Afghan drone strikes in August of 2020. And if anybody remembers, I was very skeptical on the show about that reporting. I didn't just say like, oh, this is the case, it's true. There are certainly parts of it that seem more legit than others, but most of that has panned out. And so I do think that it's very possible that Murphy is right on this. Also, I guess I assume that this was going on, although the big detail, the shocking detail with me that would have gone back over a decade. So as I mentioned, there were 3 Russian soldiers that were killed in another drone strike deep inside Russian territory. The Ukrainian foreign minister says no talks with Russia and until after a war crimes tribunal. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Ukrainian foreign minister told the Associated Press on Monday that Russia must face a tribunal for alleged war crimes in Ukraine before direct peace talks can be held between Kiev and Moscow. The comments are the latest sign that there's no end in sight to the fighting in Ukraine, as Russia would never comply with the conditions that the foreign minister laid out, and the U.S. continues to escalate military aid and other kinds of support for Kiev. For his part, Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Sunday that Moscow is prepared to negotiate an end to the war and that Ukraine and its Western partners were not. Now, I saw this, and then I also saw, I believe it was Lavrov recently said that, Ukraine has said set their terms or that, the Russian military would enforce them. And so, both parties right now are putting out a pretty strong and firm hard line. All right, the next, this is a little video I got from Twitter, and I want to give everybody a warning real quick. If you got the kids around, which I always assume people don't listen to my show with their kids around just because I'm talking about murder and war and all kinds of terrible things. But if they are, there are some F words in this little clip I am about to play. I got this from Matt Blumenthal's Twitter, and it's of Andrew Milbourne of the Mozart Group, and that is a mercenary firm that was meant to counter the Wagner Group. And so these people have been operating in Ukraine. I'm just going to play. It's about 2 minutes long, and then I will say what I want to say about it.
It's a corrupt, fucked up society. So I'm not a big fan of Ukraine. Oh, what is that?
This is Buffalo Trace.
Okay. And the Ukrainians are in violation of the Hague Convention. There is a I forget the exact phraseology, but it is. We looked at this closely, and it's yeah. They should be no filming of. The phrase, the terminology is bringing attention, blah 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 blah, to media, and yes, the Ukrainians are violating that. You know, I absolutely. They're filming of a number of things that they're doing with POWs is violating law of armed conflict, and he can't, guys.
Right.
Killing the Russian prisoners is
Right. And it's interesting because in the past, in you like Latin America or whatever, if U.S. Forces or employees were involved with any force that committed, war atrocities or
right
whatever,
back, right?
you have to, you're done.
Yeah.
But we're obviously not going to pull our support from Ukraine at this
Well,
time.
I mean, yeah,
about
I mean,
these
oh,
violations.
it's atrocities. No,
Yeah.
I mean, it still is. I mean, you shouldn't kill dudes who, I mean, everyone knows who surrendered. I mean, and there was plenty of that. But my point is, it's not about Ukraine. We're not like, I happen to have, Ukraine flag tied to my bag, but I'm not, oh my God, Ukraine's so awesome. No, because I understand that there are plenty fucked up people running Ukraine. It's not about that. It's about global norms, right?
Right.
It's about Putin. It's like
Right.
allowing dudes in the 21st century like Putin
Right.
to do what they want to do.
It's a just fight.
Yeah, it is. It's
All right, so here we have somebody that's fighting alongside the Ukrainian forces, just laying it out in really no uncertain terms here that the Ukrainians are committing war crimes. And, just because, I mean, this war has a lot of complicated layers, but Russia did invade Ukraine, right? Come down to that. Just because your country was invaded doesn't mean that there's no more, expectations that your country follows the rules of war more than others. And of course, the most disturbing things are the execution of POWs, the torture of POWs. And again, just the way that this guy is describing the Ukrainian government that he worked for and fought for as being this corrupt and this problematic is huge. Again, and then we have the commentary from one of the guys he's chatting with saying that, look, this is wild because if it was Latin America or somewhere else, which this isn't exactly true, but it's more true that we would do something. Now, we support the resistance to Assad in Syria. The Kurds are certainly no angels in Syria. We've supported a lot of bad people around the world as insurgent groups. At the same time, he is right, though, that if the U.S. Army was supporting another country to this extent and that country was carrying out this level of human rights abuses, you would think that there would be more interest. Even if we're not ending that support, there would be something happening. There would be conversation around how are we going to dull this down, and there's just not at all. When it comes to Ukraine. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap up this show for today. I hope you all enjoyed it and everything. Just want to let you know I am in the process of moving. So if background looks different this week, things are a little off or different. That's why I'm hoping to get shows out on the normal schedule, writing articles on the normal schedule. I think I'll be able to take care of everything. But just in case you don't hear from me when you expect to, I'm probably just got caught up in a little bit of personal stuff, and I'm trying to sort everything out. Again, thank you all so much for everybody who's supporting the show, especially those of you who are supporting our fundraiser at the Libertarian Institute. If you are, it's right at the end of the year now, so if you got some money you don't want to give to the IRS, you got something you got to do with it, we'll take it. We'll help you out there. So go on over to the Libertarian Institute and make a donation, and I'll be back with more shows later in the week.